Hello and welcome to another episode of Open Up the Workforce, where we speak with executives leading and advancing inclusion, diversity, and equity for the future of work. Today, we are joined by Steve Cadigan, LinkedIn's first CHRO and a leader in the future of work. Steve has been one to also empower entrepreneurs and really embrace the future of technology when it comes to HR. Thank you so much for joining us today, Steve. So you have been at the forefront of global talent strategy and company culture for the past 30 years. Can you tell us about yourself, your work, especially as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives?
Well, I have the great fortune of being the son of someone who actually preached sermons with Dr. Martin Luther King back in the 60s. So, diversity, equity, inclusion's been in my veins since I was born, and it was very important to my family, very important to the fabric of, who I am. I've had a chance to work and practice human resources in Asia, Canada, US, and done lots of acquisitions around the world. And I have to say, when it comes to this space, the evolution, I feel, is at a point of acceleration right now. It was a topic that was of interest probably the first 10 years of my career. The second 10, it was, hey, as I got to Silicon Valley, let's try to, do something about this. And the third, 10-year cycle was probably, hey, let's measure it, let's report on it, and let's, make this issue more well known and start putting resources and money behind it. And hopefully we get a chance to talk about it today. But one of the cool parts in my career arc was being able to help build LinkedIn to help, shine a light on the demographics of organizations. And I think that that was a great experience. We can talk a little bit about that, but that's probably the phase of my contribution when I look back on my career that I'm most proud of, is building a platform where people and organizations can actually put their agenda forward to potential candidates and employees around, this is what we really are doing and how we're doing it.
Thank you for sharing that, Steve. And I really admire that about the work that you've done, especially at LinkedIn, because at LinkedIn, you're famous for scaling from 400 to over 4,000 employees in like 3.5 years, which is wild to think about that type of growth. And when you build that type of growth, it's really important to think about company culture and thinking about who is part of that growth, especially as it relates to D&I. So how did you factor that into your growth? Can you share some concrete examples with us?
One of the things that was very important when we were building LinkedIn was to be relevant to every country in the world, and every geography and every industry. And that was a big part of what was important to us. And I've always felt, and I think the leadership team at LinkedIn felt the same way, that if you make diversity, DEI, an initiative, it probably will fail. If you make it core to who you are and part of your values, then it's not the extra thing. It's not another thing. And if you sometimes, I've been informed, I wrote my master's thesis in college on this book by Edward Said called Orientalism. And the main point of that book, which has informed a lot of my thinking, is as soon as you start looking for differences, you start finding ways that people are different rather than ways that people are alike. And I think what I really feel that we try to do when we're growing super, super fast is, in many, many different geographies, is give voice and give a platform for people to be able to contribute. So, for example, we wouldn't say, this is our culture and study it up. For most of our new hires, we would say, come here and help us make this a great culture. We think we know what we're doing. And that really is an inclusive, inviting opportunity right from the meeting, right from the first point of contact. Come here and help make us better. Not that we know everything, because we don't, and we're growing and we're a young company. And I think that's a big thing that most organizations miss, is feeling like they have to get it perfect when it's almost impossible as your demographic and your employee base keeps changing. So that was a big part of it. Come here and help build this company and build a culture that you want to have be part of you.
Absolutely. I think I take away a few things from you when you say that. And one of them is kind of my personal motto is like, I'm not here to be right, I'm here to get it right. And Brene Brown talks about this a lot, and I'm such a big believer of that's how company culture should evolve. And when we started building our interview practices at Symba, we rethought, we said, we don't want to even ask the question around culture fit, right? It should be culture add, and we should be always evolving and improving the work that we do. So I love that you share that, Stephen. Going back to when you shared at the beginning about your international experiences, and I've had international experiences with, living in London, doing my graduate studies there, and traveled around and studied how this impacts different teams and different companies. I'd love to get your perspective across the countries and regions that you visited. How have you seen maybe talent development evolve, and especially some of the challenges as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion beyond just the United States?
I feel the biggest challenge, and I'm facing it in my work with many leaders and businesses around the world today globally, is that the pace and the life cycle of a business right now is so short. The pace is so fast, and the life cycle of many businesses is so short because there are so many new disruptors. There's so many new game changers that talent development is taking a back seat. And it's not because people are not wise or they don't want to invest, but it's, hey, the immediacy. If we don't survive, like, it doesn't matter that I make you a great leader for 2 years from now, because we may not be here 2 years from now. We need to really be focused on the present. And that whole, the best-selling all-time book on leadership is Built to Last: How to Build a 100-Year Company. And I would argue that today, most organizations don't feel that that is a worthy aspiration because there's so many things out of their control that could change their destiny. And so that, I think, is part of the challenge for organizations today in making people better for tomorrow is, do you recognize that that's a worthy investment, even if they're going to go, even if your company isn't going to be around in 30 years? And I see that in every company that I'm helping right now is, this struggle of people aren't staying as long. Why should I invest in them? And I say, well, what's the cost if you don't invest in them? And even if they go, maybe they're going to refer people back to you and say, wow, when I was at Symba, I was only there 2 or 3 years, but man, it was incredible. I learned a lot, and I'm taking away a lot. So that's the challenge, the friction that I'm seeing with this conversation right now, Ahva.
That is so accurate. Even as a startup, right? Sometimes you're so reactive, as you're saying. You think about, why should I invest in something like that I might not see the benefits? And I think there's always this friction, as you mentioned, with being reactive and being strategic, right? We want to be strategic. We want to lift ourselves up, but sometimes it's all we can see in front of us is that I need to make sure that we're hiring and meeting these the needs of these specific teams. And the long-term diversity, equity, inclusion strategy that is more strategic, takes a lot more resources, takes a lot more buy-in, is difficult to kind of move everyone across. So how do you kind of advise executives, HR leaders, employers to kind of think about balancing the two? Because you do have to solve the fires that are immediate, but you also have to think for the long run.
I think the best way to think about development going forward is that it's not an extra thing. It's what you do. Designing new experiences, new challenges, new goals, new objectives, new teams for your staff. That it's not, hey, we're going to invite a professor in and take a pause in doing what we do for 4 hours while someone else comes in and now say professor or whatever. No, we're going to design learning in the work. And we're going to create environments where you're constantly challenged and stretched, so that feeds what I think is the greatest retentive investment you can make, is giving people new things they've never done before, which unlocks disproportionate energy and overperformance, and I think greater commitment. And that really falls on leaders. Leaders are going to have to start shifting. And we're already seeing it from, I'm a taskmaster, I'm designing what you should do, to how can I grow you and deliver value to the company and to you at the same time? And we don't have a choice of it, because listen, the skill gap everyone knows is growing. Technology is changing faster than our ability to upskill people to leverage that technology. So we're heading towards a reality. This is a little bit scary for some people, but we're heading towards a reality where we're going to be hiring people not based on what they know, but based on what they can learn. Because we know the job they're doing today is going to be different. We know they're going to need new skills. So the first thing I need to do before I even consider you for this job is, can you learn? Can you grow? Can you demonstrate to me a pattern of that in your past experiences?
That's really important. And I know when I read your book, Worthquake, you talked a lot about how important addressing the skills gap is, and half of jobs are going to be replaced by automation. And so it is a really important time for employers to think through how are they upskilling their team, and for employees to really think through how they're going to have job security in the future. As we think about the skills gap and who gets trained, how do we ensure that underrepresented talent isn't left out of the equation and we're actively including everyone?
One company that I worked for did this incredibly well, remarkably well, and they still do it today, Cisco Systems. Cisco combined their philanthropic efforts and addressed a skill gap at the same time. They've got this thing called Cisco Network Academies that goes into low-income neighborhoods and parts of the world, and they train students on how to be Cisco certified network technicians. So they're going to these places, teaching people, giving people these career paths, servicing themselves, but also servicing, making people economically independent. And those are, when organizations can figure that out and find a way to solve multiple problems, investing in community, philanthropy, building my talent pipeline, giving people economic opportunity, that's super powerful. And it's rare that you see that combo, but that's one thing that I was there when that whole thing. There's a woman named Tae Yu. I was an unbelievably talented woman who ran Cisco philanthropy for years, and she helped put that together. But that's something that I think we all are going to have to get more involved in, because universities and schools are not going to be able to manage developing the pipeline of skills and talent that we need. We're going to have to own that as organizations.
I love this idea that you shared about Cisco. For some companies that might feel like, wow, that's brilliant, but how do we even start planning or mapping something out like that? Is there a phase one for employers who are listening today?
I think so. And I think it's not as hard as some people think. I think the idea for Cisco Network Academies came from asking employees what we could do. What would make you proud? How could we address some of our needs in multiple ways, and triangulating that with different people in different countries and different departments and putting that together. And I think if you're not sure, but you know that you need to address some of these things, ask your staff, ask your investors, ask your community, ask your board, ask your advisors, what can we do? And I think you will find the seeds of brilliant ideas. Most of the times when we ever hit a roadblock in the companies that I've been at, like, hey, let's go ask everyone. Let's ask the employees, and then we can crowdsource and see what gets a lot of energy. And sometimes even if you don't follow through on some of the ideas that your people have, the fact that you asked is worth so much to them.
That's so powerful. And I've learned that too, building out our startup and we've done anonymous surveys, because sometimes in a remote or hybrid setting, it's really hard to gauge how people are feeling. You can't see body language. Screens are all on mute. You can't really understand the sentiment. So when you think about belonging in the workplace and thinking about how much our workplace has shifted throughout the last 5 years or so, how do you think HR now is tasked with creating a workplace that inspires true belonging?
I think the most important investment that human resource professionals can make is really coaching their leaders and their frontline managers who are touching more of the day-to-day lives of employees in the organization and helping them learn how to have hard conversations. I've been really racking my brains over the last 3 years during the pandemic. I've been really challenged by my sister, who cares very passionately around this the subject of diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging. And she's like, Steve, I want you to speak up more because you have a lot of followers. I'm like, Katie, look at me. I'm a white guy. Who's going to listen to me? She goes, no, because of that, you've got a responsibility. And so my sister, Katie, really tasked me with thinking about it. I was like, well, what can I contribute to this conversation? And I look back on what I did in most of the organizations I worked in. And I think the skill of talking about hard stuff, like people feeling excluded, people feeling left out, people feeling that they're being treated differently. We have to learn how to talk about that in a constructive way instead of drawing lines. Oh, it's too emotional. Shut down. Let's get the lawyers involved. I need to quit. I think this is something that we're heading to a place, at least in America and probably a lot of other countries, where we're talking about more about how we're different than how we're alike, and how we all want to feel like we're a part of something. And having these conversations, these moments where we can be real is super important. And it's probably the most underinvested in skill, I think, in most companies today is, teaching your leaders how to talk about hard stuff, rather than go turtle, which is stick your head in the sand and pretend it's not happening. And there's a lot of hard stuff. And we've seen some really wild approaches to dealing with all the stuff going on in society, whether it's George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, political difference. Some companies recently have said, we will not talk about society in this business. Coinbase and Basecamp, two companies in Silicon Valley, said, from now on, we will not talk about society in here, just work. Now, that's interesting. Like, I don't know how you do that, because I sometimes like to make sense of the world through my colleagues at work. But they took that approach as an experiment, saying, some people are feeling if they're not not being part of the conversation, that they're being looked down upon. So we don't want them to feel that way. So we're going to try to. So I think that's the wrong approach. I think we should be teaching people how to talk about hard stuff and getting better at it.
Absolutely. And I think everyone has a seat at the table. I know you said, as a white man, you said you don't feel like you should be a driver of the conversation, but you do have an important seat at the table, because silence says something, right? Silence is not speaking up, and silence doesn't create an environment for people to speak. And at Symba, we really, really value discussion about these topics. I mean, when the war in Ukraine broke out, we all talked about it because it impacted us and as individuals and who we are and how we come to the table. When the protests in Iran began, as a woman of color from Iran, and I did my thesis on this topic, I was very impacted and moved. And so I think it's important. I don't know necessarily the correct answer of how in a remote setting it's effective to do this, because sometimes in the remote setting you get into a meeting and immediately you're talking about what is at hand. So when you think about belonging, is there some tactics in a remote or hybrid setting that you might explore or encourage teams to think about so they can have some of these conversations? So it's not just we get on Zoom and it's about the deliverable.
Yeah, I think we have to carve out time to be intentionally focused on, are you okay? Do you have a question? Does that make sense to you? What might about what you just heard make you want to resist? So let me give you an example. One of the most high profile companies in the world, I have a friend who's in a very senior recruiting role there. And he's a white male like me, and we were having coffee not long ago, and he said, you will not believe what I was just asked to do. And I said, what's that? He goes, well, they told me that, 60% of my candidates have to be African American this year. And he's like, well, I guess I don't have a future in this company. I go, well, hang on a second. Did they tell you why? Did they explain to you why that was a strategy that was important to the company and why they want you to help fulfill that? I said, no, they didn't. And I think that organization missed an opportunity, because what happens is they overlook the fact that my friend's first reaction is going to be, wait a second, if you're going to elevate somebody else, it may be at my detriment. So why would I want to help you with that? So what they were going to create is a passive resistor. You understand? And so this is what I mean if we want to create places where people feel belong, we have to include everyone in that conversation, especially the people who may be feeling like, hey, if we're going to give someone a little bit more spotlight, does that mean less for me? And recognize that while others who don't feel the spotlight's on them may feel, well, too bad, it's been on you for forever, that person's going to block it. And so we need to recognize and be open and honest about that. And every time I've facilitated discussions around really hard stuff, eyes get opened and people go, whoa. And to me, that's a win. Well, I never thought about that. But if you're not creating a safe, trusting environment, those conversations will never happen. People will just hold it to themselves, passively resist, and you're going to deal with, not being able to realize your objectives. And sadly, in this topic, we don't have a laundry list of huge wins. Probably the one company that I know of that's invested the most is Salesforce. And there was a great story about this last year where they invested millions of dollars, did millions of different things, got an incredibly charismatic leader. And after 2 years, like, what have we done? Like they didn't feel like they moved the needle at all. And that means this is a hard problem. It's a hard challenge. Doesn't mean it's not worth solving, but it's not a simple flip the switch, everyone do this, okay, check the box. It's going to be a while, but we've got to put in the effort because it's worth the effort.
Yes, and that brings me to so many of the things we talked about at the beginning about being reactive versus strategic. And it's when you share that story with me, Steve, immediately my mind went into thinking he didn't have a future because he couldn't create a pipeline of 60% African American. That's what I thought maybe that he
Right.
said. But then thinking about that on the impact of his job security was actually not where my mind went initially. So that's incredibly fascinating. I think it's really important for companies, regardless of what they are doing, the why of whatever business decision or objective is very clear to people, because it's hard to rally behind something that we don't know the why for. So when you think about the why for diversity, equity, and inclusion, maybe if you want to speak to Silicon Valley, because I know that's where we're based in startups, what would you encourage leaders at these organizations? What is the why you would talk to them about?
The wrong approach, let me start with that one first, is an approach that the why is based on guilt. If you don't do this, you're a bad person, you have low morals, you haven't figured out. And I think that the right why is better world, better community, better future for your kids, better, the tide rises for all. We all benefit when the tide rises. And that's a hard sell for some. It's like, no, I want my boat to rise. It doesn't matter about other people's boats. Like, yeah, but if those boats don't rise, this whole notion of, we're dealing with this, 26 states in America just raised the minimum wage anywhere from to $9 to, almost $16 in some states. And we've seen during the pandemic, all these big companies that had lobbyists in Washington to keep the minimum wage low disappear as those companies struggle to hire people. And now all those lobby dollars have gone into solve the recruiting. It's got to be diversity. And right now, I think if we're honest, we have to recognize we've got a great opportunity. The talent pipelines that used to be full are no longer full. So now we're being forced to have to be creative. And I think the organizations that are figuring it out first are going to have a real huge advantage here. I'm an optimist, but I'm also a realist. So that's how I think this is a great opportunity that we have to sort of move it forward, because the why is you have to, or you're not going to be able to hire. You're going to have to broaden your scope, right?
Absolutely. Yes. I think you nailed it, Steve. That's it. You have to do it. The time is now, and competition for talent is fierce, and it's never been this way before. So you have to think outside the box. You have to rewrite your job descriptions and be more inclusive. If it doesn't need a 4-year degree, you have to rethink it and really open up the doors, because that's how you succeed. Ultimately, the number one asset of an organization and value that guarantees your success is the people behind it.
Right.
So
and it's the same
important
reason why we figured out, sorry to interrupt, I'm getting excited now. The same reason at LinkedIn, did we figure out culture was great because we're a bunch of smart people and we thought culture was great? No, we didn't. We figured out culture was great because we had no other asset. We couldn't pay more than Google or Apple or Facebook. We couldn't build beautiful buildings like they had or have those benefits. We said we have to be the best place they've ever worked. So it was the expediency of competitive pressure that opened our eyes to, oh my gosh, we've got something that costs nothing, becoming a great place for people. And I think that's that same challenge is going to be hopefully presented to many organizations around the world who are really struggling. It just came out this week that accountants, the number of people going into accounting or applying for accounting jobs has just decreased by 40%. Not 10, not 20, 40. So that's massive. And you might say, oh, well, they're just making room for all the robots and automation is coming in. Okay, maybe in part. But their pipeline is shrinking. So they're going to have to think differently around how do we get people excited about this profession, right? And that's happened in education and healthcare and lots of other ones that you and I have talked about offline before. But yeah, it's a moment.
It is a powerful moment. As someone who studies the space, it's just been so fascinating to see what companies are doing. I'm so intrigued. And then I always, I feel like it's very interesting because every company is very different. And we see this at Symba with different internship and early careers program. Every organization sets up their program completely different than the next, which is kind of wild to see. But every company has an opportunity right now to step up and try new things. And employers and employees were excited. It's a new thing, and we get to be a part of that journey.
You do, and but it's also really scary, Ahva, because listen, we were all taught in schools and business schools, if you want to do something new, the first step is benchmark what everyone else is doing. Well, let's take hybrid work. We don't have enough data to know. And as you said, a really, really important point, I hope our listeners hear, which is every organization has different characters, peoples, values, paradigms. And we're used to the one size fits all model, and it's completely not realizable anymore. We're going to have to customize. And that the first knee jerk is, oh, that's going to be hard. Yeah, but it could be delivered in such a way that we produce greater results than we've ever seen before. And we're starting to see that. So, some final thoughts on the world of work right now. Most business leaders, when I ask them, how's it going? They feel like, oh my gosh, Steve, it's really hard. It's been crazy. I said, well, how are your results? Oh, they've been amazing. Okay, so why didn't you start with, it's been amazing? You started with, oh my gosh, it's been really hard. People are quitting. It's harder to recruit. It's really, all these things are changing. And then I ask you how your business is, and you say, well, we've had the best 3 years ever. I'm like, why don't you answer the question? Wow, we've learned so much about how to be effective in a high velocity, high change world. And that's part of the human nature, right? We want to feel we're in control a little bit. And the truth is there's a lot more out of our control than we've ever seen before in the world of work. And it's hard, but as you said, it's exciting because we're getting a chance to build new things and solve new problems.
Yeah, some good things and really incredible outcomes are not achieved the easy way, right? If things were easy, then there really wouldn't be anything new that we learn or any challenge that we gain. So I think it is important that we realize this, it's going to be hard, and being open to that. Part of this series and the work that we are doing at Symba is all around open up the workforce. That's our mission. And what it really means to us at Symba is a future workforce that is equitable for creating access to jobs and wealth creation for everyone. So we'd love to hear your perspective, Steve. What do you think are the next steps talent leaders need to do in order to open up the workforce?
I think we're going to have to do things we're starting to see, because it's happening quicker than I was expecting it to, but more transparency around how we make decisions here. Who gets promoted? Why do they get promoted? What attributes are really, really important to us? How we pay and why we pay, and who gets rewarded. All those things that have been traditionally in a black box that make people suspicious. I mean, human nature is, if I don't know something, I think the worst. And in a world where competing for talent is increasingly more challenging, what people want is more, safety and comfort and psychological, trust and psychological safety. So we're going to have to learn, and organizations are going to have to learn how to be more, open around things that traditionally we weren't, putting out there. And we still don't have 100% endorsement for, we're going to post all of our demographics, our employee demographic, age, gender, ethnicity. Some people are voluntarily doing that, some people aren't. But I think that, the more you do that, the more people can see, well, yeah, there are people like me there. Maybe that is a place I want to go, and feel that I can make a difference. So that whole transparency, I think, is a really big, worthy investment going forward towards creating an environment of high trust where people can feel like they can do their best work.
Definitely. And once you're transparency, you have that, you can measure it and you can hold yourself accountable. And I think that's a critical first step. Thank you so much, Steve. I'm so excited and optimistic, even though I know it's going to take a lot of hard work for our employers to get to where we want to, but it's a time to experiment. And this is really the time for a lot of leaders. This is a powerful moment in the world of HR and just at the future of work. So would love to open up, Steve, if there's anything else you'd like to share with the audience.
Well, I just want to applaud you for having this conversation, for having more conversations like this, for pushing the envelope. This is such a worthy topic, and also for inviting me to contribute to the conversation. I look forward to more. And as you know, because I'm a huge fan of what you and your team are doing, I think we need to have, organizations need to be hosting these conferences, not just in a podcast. Like, let's just have it live, right? So maybe the next evolution of this for you is, you do this one live inside an organization and talk to various leaders and see what they think. And this whole notion of cultural transparency, I think, is taking root. There's an organization that I work with called M-Train that's doing some really cool work around surveys, really revealing really cool cultural insights. Instead of just saying, hey, do you feel like you belong here? Asking things like, what have you seen that hasn't made you feel like you belong? So we can have actionable insights versus just, a survey result. So, and that, artificial intelligence is giving us, I think, opportunities to see things that we haven't been able to see before. So I'm like you, I'm super optimistic, and thanks for having me on the show, Ahva.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Steve.